Hey guys, Frank Flegg here, founder of Ethical Property Partners, and welcome to my complete guide to buy-to-let investing, the step-to-step guide for 2021. What works, what doesn't work, how should you go about buying your own buy-to-let properties in this very changeable year, 2021. So there are going to be 7 steps that I'm going to go through. If you miss out one of the steps, if you do it differently, then your results will not be as great as they could be. If you're familiar with Ethical Property Partners, you'll know the kind of deals we do, the phenomenal returns on investment that my investors get, rather than a 5% ROI, return on investment, rather than a 10% return on investment. We at EPP are achieving 100% return on their investments, which is all of our money back out, not in a year, sometimes in as little as just 1 month. That is what's possible with sophisticated property investing. And in this complete guide, I'm going to take you through the 7 steps. So step 1 is you need to be direct to the vendor. Now, most people think to themselves, especially novice investors, what I need to be doing is I need to be going where the properties are. I need to go on to Rightmove. I need to go into an auction and see all the properties because that's where they are. And if you put in UK property and look at what's available to you, there are thousands upon thousands of properties. That's not where you want to be looking for your buy-to-let investments, guys. If you buy retail, and that is retail, they are on the shop shelf, ready to be bought, you are not going to be getting the returns that we get on EPP. You'll be getting your 5% returns, your 10% returns. You know the problem with a 10% return? Most people say, oh, that's great. It's 100 times better than I'm getting in the bank. Well, at 0.1% at Bank of England base rate, 100 times better is not that great. It's still pretty rubbish. The problem with a 10% return is it takes you 10 years to get your money back. So if you're buying a £100,000 house and the market doesn't move for 10 years, it's going to take you 10 years to get your money back from that £25,000 investment. If you're putting £25,000 into a £100,000 purchase, bank lends you £75,000, and you make a 10% per annum return, some investors go, yay, that's fantastic. It's not that fantastic when you work it out, because £25,000, a 10% return is £2,500 a year. It will take you 10 years to save another £25,000 before you can invest again. That's too slow. It's agonizingly slow. If you want to be full-time in property, that's not going to get you there. And people say, yeah, but you get the property going up in value. Yes, but properties also go down in value. So maybe we're talking 15 years now, or if you're lucky and you see lots of capital growth, maybe 5 years. It's still too slow. So the first thing is you don't want to go where the properties are, because that's where everyone's trying to buy. That's where you're going to pay market value, or you're going to buy it in normal market conditions. You're going to be very confined as to how you can buy the property. And what you need to be doing, if you want to do buy-to-let properly, if you want to be getting those fantastic returns, is you need to be controlling the process. And the only way you can do that is by getting direct to vendor. And what I mean by that is having a conversation with the vendor without anyone else's influence, without having to go through an estate agent, without having to go through lawyers. And it's not because we're trying to hoodwink anyone. We're not trying to do anything dodgy or trying to hide what we're trying to do or trying to persuade. It's just that step 2 is impossible unless you're direct to the vendor. And so most people will go to estate agents, they'll go on to Rightmove, Zoopla, or they'll go to auctions. Those are not the places to go. You need to get direct to your vendor, and you need off-market properties. Now, off-market properties are where 95% of the deals come from, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But on-market properties are still possible. And now you're thinking to yourself, hang on a minute, Frank just said I need to go off market and that I don't want to buy retail, but 5% of his deals are on the market. What's going on, Frank? Well, let me explain. There are a very small percentage of properties, very, very small, maybe 1 in 1,000 is my estimation, that are on the open market where the vendor is open to a sophisticated property investing strategy, SPI investing as we talk about it. The difficulty is if you go and view 100 properties, likelihood is you're not going to see the one where the vendor's motivated. And even more likely is even if you walk into the property and you go, oh, this is an okay property, because you're not sitting down and having a coffee with the vendor and building rapport and getting to know them, you've got an even less of a chance of working out that they're motivated. And so that is the challenge that you're faced with in trying to find on-market properties. But let me give you a few tips, because there are some tips as to how you can identify those vendors that are motivated. And we use this to great effect on EPP. So the first tip is that these vendors are actually waving at you. They're actually saying, excuse me over here, I'm a motivated vendor. And you can spot them on the open market in a few ways. The first and the easiest way of spotting them is they've listed their property for auction. So if a vendor goes to auction, they're automatically saying, excuse me, I've got an unusual property, or I'm in an unusual situation, I need to sell quickly, or my property's unmortgageable, or there's something unusual about my situation. So a good strategy for getting direct to vendor, the direct to vendor relationship is critical, is to contact, write letters to if you like, those vendors who are listing properties at auction. Now, we're not talking about going into the auction, because as soon as you're in the auction room and you're, whether it's virtual or in person, you're no longer in a relating situation. You can't talk to the vendor and ask them questions. You can't solve their problems. You're now just with the masses competing on price, and that's not how you invest in a sophisticated manner. Now you're buying retail rather than wholesale. So the first thing that you need to do is you need to get direct to that vendor. So people that list their properties for auction, that's a good indicator that they're keen to sell in a sophisticated way. They're a motivated vendor. An even more motivated type of seller is someone whose property has failed to sell at auction. So you've got people that list their property for sale at auction, go right to them, ask them if they'd like a coffee, if they'd like to talk to you about you buying their property, tell them that you want to buy their property. Then you've got the people in the middle that are actually in the auction. Ignore that. You're not going to get good deals in auctions. In fact, it's a better place to sell than to buy. And most people, you know, those that watch Homes Under the Hammer, they're saying, oh yeah, I got a great deal. I bought it for 80 and I spent 10 on it and I've made myself £10,000. And you factor in legals, estate agents' cost, the stamp duty, and before you know it, they've made a loss. I've actually seen programs where I've done the numbers and they've been in my hometown and I thought, they've made a loss on that. I know the program looks better if there's a profit, but absolutely, we call them Mickey Mouse numbers. So don't buy in the room. Don't buy in the room. But you can offer, you can write to people who failed to sell at auction because they're super motivated. They're the people that really, really need to sell now because they didn't go on the open market for some reason, or they failed to sell on the open market with agents. They've listed it in auction. They've got all excited. Maybe they got your letter before auction and they thought, no, I'll leave it. I'll sell at auction because the auctioneer tells them that they're likely to sell, and then it doesn't sell at auction, and now I haven't got any options now, I don't know what to do, until your letter drops on their doorstep, and now they're thinking, oh, this could work really well for me. So there's a few ways of finding these people to write to. The easiest probably is to actually go on land registry. So when the property is listed in the auctioneer's catalogue, and you can subscribe to some online portals that will show you all of the auction catalogues for all auctions. So a good one is EIG. They're called the Essential Information Group. Brilliant piece of software. They're basically the right move for auctions. And so the problem with auctions sometimes is if I live in Derbyshire and I only want to invest in Derbyshire, I actually invest nationwide, but if I only want to invest in Derbyshire, I know my local auctioneers, so I can keep an eye on their catalogues, I can make sure I get them delivered, I can get notifications from them when a property is listed, etc. But what happens when Savills in London sells something on the high street in my local town and I just happen not to walk past it for the 3 weeks, 4 weeks that it's marketed for, I might not know about it because I'm not going to be monitoring an auction in London. I might not be monitoring an auction in Birmingham, which could easily sell properties in my hometown in Derbyshire because we're all East Midlands. And so you could easily miss a great property, and those are often the best ones because no one else knows about them because they're being listed by an auctioneer out of area, so no one local knows about them. EIG is your solution. It's not cheap, I think it's a few £100s a year, but what it does is you can set up alerts. So you can say, I'm interested in residential property, commercial property, I want properties in this area, or I want properties at this price point. You can even say I want properties with this kind of tenant, or I want vacant properties, I want properties with these kind of problems. It can be very specific, and it will send you an email every time one of those properties pops up within your search area, and you can search the whole of the UK if you like. So you're getting the drop on those properties. So now you can actually write to every single property that's listed for auction in your geographic county, for example. Very, very powerful and not very expensive to just, what is it, a couple of quid to write a letter to someone and see if they're interested in selling. So once you've got the catalogue and you know the property, you can pop on Land Registry. Costs you £3 to download the owner's home address, and you can then write to them at their registered address. So that's probably the simplest way. There are some other ways. That's probably the simplest way of getting their contact details. And of course, once you've written to them, you watch to see if the property actually sells at auction. If it doesn't, you can write to them again, and again EIG can tell you that. EIG can actually give you a list of all the properties that didn't sell across the country in the last 30 days. Wouldn't that be useful to be able to actually contact them? So that's one of the ways of finding motivated sellers who are already on the open market, auction properties, but not in the conventional sense. Secondly, there are many properties on Rightmove that are just shouting out to us that they are owned by motivated vendors. And the best way of spotting them is to look in your area at the average amount of time it takes for a property to sell. So at the moment, properties are selling quite quickly. I am expecting that as the economy continues to decline, as the recession lengthens, the length of time that the properties are sitting on the market will also lengthen. So the housing market, I'm expecting it to soften. House prices may drop, they may not drop. We're not making predictions in this video, but I do expect for the time that a property takes to sell from being listed to going under offer and then to actually completing to lengthen. So if, let's say, a property typically in your area, let's say you're in the southeast somewhere, let's say you're in Slough or Maidenhead, somewhere down there, I think that's Buckinghamshire. If you're in that part of the world, you're probably looking at 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. You put a property on the market and it's under offer within maybe even sooner, maybe 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, something like that. If someone has been sat on the market in that area for 4 months, then they're waving at you. They're saying, I'm unusual, there's something unusual about my property. If that property goes off the market and then comes back on, and goes off and comes back on, it shows you there's something unusual about the property. People are struggling to buy it. They want to buy it, they make an offer, it gets accepted, but then they can't actually complete, they can't get finance. There's something unusual about title, there's something unusual about construction, maybe it's a blighted property, means you can't get a mortgage on it. There's something unusual about it. Those are the vendors you want to speak to. And people often say to me, Frank, why do you always look for a problem? Why don't you just go for simple? And the reason for that is simple is market value at market conditions. That's the 999 properties out of 1,000 that I don't want to buy. I don't want to buy the boring ones at retail because they're going to take me 10, 20 years to get my money back. I want the really unusual one where I can solve the problem for the person. I'm moving on to our tip 2 and 3 now. I want to solve a problem because that solving the problem is where I earn my money. That's where I get my return in 12 months or 6 months or 3 months or 1 month. Of course, the Holy Grail is doing a deal where you don't put any money into it at all, and that is entirely possible. With the different financing strategies that we use on EPP, I've even bought properties from vendors where they've paid me money to buy the property, where I don't need a mortgage, I don't need any cash, I can even use the vendor's money. But I've covered different videos, I've used different videos to cover that in detail. But our first tip for you when buying buy-to-let property in 2021 is you've got to get direct to the vendor. You have to get direct to the vendor, because tip 2 is you need to work out their pain. You have to understand why they're motivated. And sometimes I talk to vendors and they're not motivated enough. If they're motivated like 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, I'm never going to do a deal that I'm going to want to do with them. If they want market value in the next few months, it's not for me. They're in the 999. I need to work out why someone is motivated. And once I understand what is motivating them to sell, I can solve their problem for them. And they're generally motivated by 3 things. They're either wanting money, so they're either in financial distress or they need money for something else. And don't assume that this is always someone who's in danger of repossession. It's often not. More often than not, actually, it's not that situation at all. So sometimes, yes, someone's got themselves into debt, especially at the moment, perhaps they've lost a job, etc., and they want to sell the property quickly to pay off their debts and go into rented accommodation. That's not an uncommon situation. However, far more often, it's someone who's inherited a property and they don't really care about getting top dollar for it. They would just rather sell it and get the money quickly, because perhaps there's 5 kids. You know, if you knock £50,000 off a property between 5 children, they're all taking a £10,000 hit. That's not that great, perhaps, when they're all putting perhaps £40,000 in their pocket. So they're all getting £40,000 and they're letting £10,000 go, but you're paying £200,000 for a £250,000 property. That's not a bad deal at all. I know it's only 80%, it's only 20% off, but that's still not a bad discount to be getting a property at, if it was probate, for example. Especially if you can do a bit of work to that property and then perhaps put tenants in it and sell it on to a retail investor because you bought it wholesale. So sometimes it's money, sometimes it's a push factor, as in, you know, they're in financial distress, but sometimes it's a pull factor, probate, or perhaps a business transaction. So I've bought properties from business people, sophisticated business people, who are happy to take a discount on the property now so that they can put the money into an investment that's going to make them way more money. And that's the critical part. They're looking at the big picture. They don't mind taking a hit now because they know what they can do with their money. So it's not always an unsophisticated vendor. Often it's a sophisticated one. So money's one of the considerations and one of the pain points that vendors have. And if a vendor has that money as a problem, then we can solve that for them. We can buy very quickly. My record last year was 6 days from the vendor accepting my offer to them having money in the account. And believe it or not, I was ready 3 days earlier than that. They weren't ready. Their solicitors weren't ready in time. But yeah, you can pay for a property very, very quickly if that's what they need, if they need money. Now, don't forget, they don't need all the money. They just need some of it. Some vendors I've given £1,000 to, and that's eased their problems for 2 months, and I can then buy their property in a relatively relaxed manner. Other vendors, they need more. I bought a property from a gentleman just before Christmas. I gave him £20,000 on exchange of contracts, and I'm paying him the difference 4.5 months later. That was a good deal for me. I got 6 months of rent. I've rented it already. He's moved on. He's got his 20 grand. It worked great. So money is quite an easy one to solve, and it is a fairly common reason for someone wanting to sell at wholesale, on wholesale terms or at wholesale prices. The second reason is time. Vendors often will want to sell very, very quickly, and we can of course help them with that. We can sell very, very quickly. Also, vendors sometimes want to sell over a long period of time, often to mitigate their capital gains tax allowances. So if a landlord is going offshore and they're going to be disposing of their properties after they've been offshore for over 5 years, they don't want to be trying to manage the properties whilst they're overseas, whilst they're in their retirement, they would love for us to purchase a lease option, for example, run the portfolio for them, and then buy the properties from them in 5.5 years when they're going to pay no capital gains tax. That's one very useful service we can provide to a landlord. We're buying a property from a landlord at the moment. He's selling all 26 properties to us, but he's doing it over time. He's doing it over a 10-year period, because once you introduce time into the equation, you can actually pay more for a property. So when we sat down with that particular landlord, we explained to him that we could buy at 75% of what the bank valued the property at, and he said, oh no, I'm not willing to accept that. I think he's only at 70% loan to value anyway, so he wouldn't have got a lot of equity out. He wouldn't have made a lot of cash by selling. But what we then said is, well, how about we pay you an amount every month for 10 years and we complete at market value. So we pay market value, but we pay over time. That's our control now, pay later strategy. He was over the moon with that. So be aware that you can pay market value, in which case you're going to pay over a long period of time, or you can buy very quickly, in which case you're going to pay a lesser amount for the property. What we say to a vendor is you can choose the price or you can choose the terms, but you can't choose both. They can't have a purchase in the next 14 days at market value. They can have market value, but we're going to be buying over 10, 15 years, or they can have the money in 14 days, 7 days if they want, but it will be at a significant discount, 75, 70, 60, 50% of market value, depending on how quickly they want the money. So we've got money. That's one of their pain points sometimes. It can be time, but it can also be responsibility. And that was the motivating factor for this landlord that we're buying the 26 properties from. He's a gentleman who's in his late 70s. He's tired of managing a big portfolio. It's a full-time job. And he loves the idea of handing over the keys literally next month. The lawyers are doing their stuff now. We'll sign off on everything. He will hand the keys over to us and he can forget about it, completely forget about it, knowing that we are buying the properties, every one of the 26, at a fixed price at today's value, but that we're managing the properties from day one. So we're going to be managing them. The brilliant thing for us is it's very little money down. I think the average amount of money, I think we're putting £2,000 into each property as a down payment. That's negligible on the properties. It's £50,000 overall, but it's negligible on each individual property. And we're making cash flow off that portfolio. So we're making an income off that portfolio from day one. We're paying him an income, but that income that we're paying him is contributing to the purchase price. So in 10 years' time, there'll be far less of the purchase price left because we've paid him over the 10 years every single month. The icing on the cake, if you like, is one would expect, we're not relying on it, but one would expect those properties to be worth more. They're in the south, so the capital growth should be quite solid. One would expect those properties to be worth more in 10 years' time than they are today. So not only have we eroded what we owe him, so we're now owing him less in 10 years' time than we do today, but also the properties aren't worth this now, they're worth this. So the actual gap is massive. We've got a lot of equity in that 10 years, at that point in 10 years' time. But it's paid us money every month from between now and then anyway, so it's a bonus. So you need to work out the pain. So we've got the first tip, which is you need to get direct to vendor. The second tip is you need to work out the vendor's pain. You need to understand what's motivating them, because if you can't work out their motivation, you can't do the third tip. And the third tip, or the third step if you want to call it that, step's probably a better word, because step 1 is getting direct to vendor, step 2 is working out their pain, step 3 is designing a win-win solution, coming up with the deal. And this is where people fall over all the time. I've actually walked into properties before now where a competitor, a property purchasing company, you know, the guys buy your house quick, yellow and black adverts in the back of a newspaper, etc., is walking up the drive. He's walking out the property as I walk towards it. He had his pointy shoes on, his shiny pointy shoes. He had his shiny suit. I never wear a suit. I don't wear shiny pointy shoes. I understand sales and psychology too well to fall for that one. I walked into that property. I asked the lady at the end, because I spend a lot of time with my vendors. They're buying me at the end of the day. They're buying the relationship, they're buying the trust, they're buying the confidence that I give them that I'm actually going to deliver. And of course I do deliver. They pay me a lot of money. If I'm buying a £160,000 property for £120,000, that's 25% off. In effect, they're paying me 40k to buy their house. And so I've got to give them a good service. I've got to give them a £40,000 service. I've got to buy quickly. I've got to communicate clearly. I've got to reassure them throughout. I've got to make sure that I deliver on what they need, because they might have a deadline. I once bought a house from a gentleman who needed to send his son for an operation in America, and he needed the cash to pay for the operation. That's pressure. And if that doesn't feel like pressure to you, if saving someone from being evicted because of a repossession through the courts, if getting the kids their money from a probate quickly because they want to get married, or sending that poor gentleman's son to the States for an operation doesn't make you feel like you're under pressure, you're in the wrong industry, you're in the wrong business. This industry's got an awful reputation, I'll be honest, and I think it's deserved. And so there's a reason we called ourselves ethical property partners. It's because we want to stand out as doing right by our vendors, doing right by our investors as well, and doing right by our clients. And so making sure that you sit down and spend time with the vendor. I always say, if you haven't spent an hour with the vendor, you've not spent long enough to understand their problem. And coming back to the guy with the shiny pointy shoes, he'd been in that property, the vendor told me, less than 5 minutes. How can you survey a property, build rapport and trust with a vendor, and expect to buy their property below market value in under 5 minutes? It's laughable. I spend at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours with a vendor, sometimes longer, helping to understand their situation, listening to their story. And once you understand why they're selling, once you understand their story and their pain fully, not, well, I just want a bit of a change, I'm thinking of going on holiday. That's not the real answer. The real answer comes 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes later, when they trust you enough to say, I've divorced, my daughter lives in Crete, she's renting, I've promised that I'll go buy a villa on the beach and we'll live together, and I need to do that next month because she doesn't believe I can do it, and I need to go live with my daughter. That's the real answer, but you're not going to get that on the phone. So, how much you want for your house? 100 grand? Yeah, I'll give you 75. Does that work for you? Bang, bang, bang. That's not going to work. That's when you sit there and they get the hankies out and they tell you why they need you to help them, or you work out a solution that no one before you has managed to work out because they thought it was impossible. That gentleman with 26 houses, 26 properties, they're a combination actually, he hasn't got anyone else that can buy his property. He's 79, 78 years old. He needs me to buy those properties from him, and he's going to pay me handsomely to do it. It's a true exchange of value, a fair exchange of value. So step 3 is design a win-win with the vendor. You have to understand what their pain is, which was step 2, and then you have to work out a solution that works for them and works for you. That's the key. It has to work for both of you. You've got to make money, those returns that I was talking about, that's a big chunk of money, and you've got to solve their actual problem, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's the responsibility and the stress and the aggravation that the property's causing them. Whatever their problem is, you have to solve it, and you have to give them certainty. And the reason you spend so long with a vendor, that guy with the pointy shoes and the shiny suit, he had only been in there 5 minutes, but he offered more money than I offered for the property. The vendor took a significant hit. She received far less from me buying the property than she would have if she'd sold it to him, but she didn't trust him to deliver. His solution wasn't as attractive to her because she wasn't convinced he was actually going to follow through. So step 1, get direct to the vendor. Step 2, work out the pain, work out their pain and how to solve it. Step 3 is design a win-win solution, a solution that works for them, works for you. And then step 4. Step 4 is you need a phenomenal power team. You can't go looking for an architect or a lawyer when you've got a deal. You need that in advance, and the solicitors have to be amazing. Your mortgage broker has to be doing buy-to-let mortgages day in, day out. Absolutely critical. On EPP, we have a power team where the professionals on there, we've used them tens if not hundreds of times, and they're tried and tested. And then we've got a provisional power team where if someone's used someone a couple of times, they put them in there, a few more people test them, and once we're confident they're brilliant, they go into the holy grail, the special area where we know that they're amazing. The rest of the market we don't even look at unless we get a recommendation, or unless sometimes they act for the other party and we think they're good, and then we have a chat with them after the transaction, say, we like dealing with you, you've got a commercial attitude to this, you really respond quickly, can we have a chat about you representing us on our transactions? We use the same solicitors all the time, we use the same accountants, the same architects, because that is how you build relationships with your power team. And we know, I've just done some training this morning with all of the EPP partners across England and Wales, and we've been training them in the documentation that our solicitors send to their vendor clients. So when we sign up a vendor, we say, right, we'll buy your house, Mrs. Jones, and we'll buy it as quickly as possible in the next 28 days if possible. This is what we need to fill in now. Your solicitor will be contacting you normally tomorrow. If we can get the documents scanned and emailed today, normally they'll hear from the solicitor the next working day. We have now studied the paperwork that the solicitor is going to send to that vendor. So we can forewarn the vendor, this is what you're going to be receiving. If they phone us, they're far more, if they get a document from the solicitor that they don't understand, they're far more likely to phone us than to phone the solicitor. And they might say, oh Frank, I've got this form, I don't quite understand it, what are they asking for? And if I'm able to say, oh, is that form ABC? Yes, that's the one. Yes, I've got a copy of it in front of me, Mrs. Jones, no problem at all. What question are you struggling with? Well, Frank, I don't understand about my property. Is it this or is it that? Oh, I've been to your property, Mrs. Jones, it's definitely that. And what they're asking is, you know, the fence at the back, do you own that, or does the neighbour, or whatever the question is? Because we know the paperwork, we can help them to answer the question. Absolutely invaluable to be able to reassure and support your vendor in that journey. So that's step number 4. There is no point putting together a brilliant deal where you're direct with the vendor, where you've worked out why they're selling, you've created a win-win solution, and then give it over to a solicitor who's going to take 5 months on it. And that is what most solicitors do. Most transactions take months and months. Every solicitor will tell you, and if you're trying to build your own power team, if you're not in the EPP community and you don't have access to our power team, that's fine. I've done videos on how to build an awesome power team. But in a nutshell, if you go to a solicitor and say, look, I want to do really quick completions, can you help me with quick transactions? Every solicitor will say yes. Any solicitor that wants business will say yes. But follow up with this question. This is my top tip for solicitors and mortgage brokers actually. Could you get a deal through in 28 days? And they'll say something like, because they're solicitors, they're high S, you know, they're risk averse people, so they won't want to back themselves into a corner. They'll say, well, if the mortgage comes through quickly, and if there aren't any problems with title, and if it's freehold and not leasehold, then yes, we can. And the key word there, the operative word is can. And so then your follow-up question is, oh, fantastic. So how many of those have you actually achieved in the last 12 months? How many completions have you got through from instruction to completion within 28 days in the last 12 months? And I'll tell you, for the vast majority of conveyancers, it will be a very round number, i.e. they won't have done any. And they'll say, well, we don't get that much of this type of business, or, well, you need a cash buyer to do that. Rubbish, we get them through in 3 weeks with a mortgage if you know what you're doing and you've got a good mortgage broker and a good solicitor. And you'll hear all these noises, but don't get away from the fact that they've just told you none. And they might even say, COVID, no, you can't do it, COVID slowed everything down. Rubbish. Special delivery still takes 24 hours. In fact, they don't guarantee it by 1 p.m, they guarantee it by 4 p.m. So each letter takes 3 hours longer to get there. That's not a big difference. What else changes? The solicitors are at home. Okay. Does the broadband work slower from home? Does the phone, do you have to talk more slowly into a phone that's your mobile on your desk rather than your landline at the office? Nothing should slow down if they've set themselves up properly, if they know what they're doing, if they're on the ball. And the problem is most solicitors aren't. Most solicitors look at a file once a week. We need our solicitors to be looking at our file twice a day. And unless they can do that, unless they're on it, your transaction will take ages. So you need a brilliant power team. I cannot stress that enough. And you're gonna have to pay for it. If you're going to a bucket conveyancing practice, and what I mean by that is a warehouse up in somewhere cheap, normally in the north of England, where they're letting you do conveyancing for £300, £400 a pop, you're going to get what you pay for. It's just going to be on a conveyor belt. You're going to speak to a different person every time. You need a firm that are on it, that are working really hard. And your mortgage broker needs to be your mortgage broker. You don't go to a mortgage broker here and then a different one here and a different one here. They have to get to know you. You have to get to know them. You have to be able to communicate clearly so they can get you good mortgages. I've done videos on how important picking the right mortgages are. It's absolutely critical, guys. So getting a brilliant mortgage broker is so important. I've only got 7 steps for you, and this is number 4, having a power team. You'd think that if you pay a lawyer, and the lawyer does their work and that's the end of it. No, not if you want 4, 5, 6 months of pain and then the vendor dropping out. If you want a 28-day completion, a 4-week, 5-week, 6-week completion, you need a good power team around you. So that's step number 4. Step number 5 is you've got to chain chase at least weekly, if not twice weekly. Now, most solicitors will get fed up with that, but not if they're on the ball. If you're phoning them on a Monday and then you're touching base with them again on a Thursday, if you ask them what needs to happen next to get to this milestone. We did some training recently where we mapped out all 3 processes, every single step along the way. In fact, I'll make this available as a resource on our website. If you go onto our website, ethicalpropertypartners.com, go to the YouTube page, we will make this as a resource available to you. It basically lists out the steps of the entire conveyancing process from a vendor's perspective, the entire conveyancing process from a purchaser's perspective, and the entire process from a mortgage acquisition perspective, assuming you're using a mortgage. And you've basically got 3 timelines, which you can then look at your deal and compare it to their deal. Have a look on the website. We'll make it available for free on there as a free download. But that process of chain chasing every week, of checking every single week where the transaction's up to and what has to happen next. And it's not enough for the solicitor to say, oh, I sent this form yesterday to the vendor. That's like one part of the job. The next part of the job is to phone the vendor. Hey, Mr. Vendor, did you get that form from the solicitors? Yes, it arrived this morning, Frank. You know, doesn't that sound good? You phone him at 11 o'clock and his form arrived at 10 o'clock. He thinks you're psychic, but it's because you're on the ball. And that's what he's paying you for. He's paying you for that professionalism, that on the ballness, that pushing it through. Oh, thank you, Frank. Do you want to just open it while I'm with you, Mr. Smith, you know, while we're on the phone? Yeah, sure. What are they asking you? They're asking me A, B, C, and are you happy you know the answers to that? Yep, no problem at all. Can I just ask you, Mr. Smith, when will you be getting that back in the post to the solicitors? I can pop to the post office this afternoon. Great, that's great. Don't forget, Mr. Smith, you're sending everything special delivery, and I'm going to reimburse you for every single receipt. Just keep those receipts. Yes, Frank, I remembered. No problem. I did the last one, special delivery. You did, Mr. Smith. Thank you ever so much. That's the conversation you want with the vendors, because you're in it together. You're on the same side. This whole other side, my side, and all that, absolute rubbish, absolute rubbish. We're in it together. I want to buy their house as quickly as possible. They want to sell it to me as quickly as possible. We're on the same team. And then you don't stop there. You phone the solicitor back. This is half an hour later. Mr. Solicitor, just spoken to Mr. Vendor. He's received your paperwork from yesterday. Thank you so much for that. Yes, he's filling it in. He's going to special deliver it with you. It will be with you by this time tomorrow, by 4 p.m. tomorrow. I'll give you a bell tomorrow just before closing to check you've actually received it. Great stuff, Frank. Thank you so much. Oh, by the way, Mr. Solicitor, he's told me that these are the 3 answers. So if you want to crack on that basis, feel free to do so. Up to you. How amazing is that? We've shortcut everything. Maybe it's got lost in the post. We would know. Mr. Solicitor, can you send it again? It wasn't received. Mr. Vendor, did you get it? Yes, but I didn't understand it and it's been sat on my fridge for 3 days. No! You need to be on it. You need to be speaking to the vendor and sorting these things out so that you can move it ahead. Because then when you hit the roadblock, when you get those obstacles, and you get them on every transaction, you can solve them quickly with the vendor. You can sit down, have a coffee, socially distanced, of course, This is your work, by the way. You can go to people's houses, you can sit down and have coffees with them, because this is essential for your business. Sit down there with your mask, you have a coffee with them, and you work out what the problem is. You come up with a win-win solution, and you're back on the treadmill. You're back buying the property because they need to sell it and you need to buy it. That's the great thing about this business, guys. We are changing people's lives by helping them to solve their property problems. So that was number 5. We've only got 2 more to go. They get easier and easier. So chain chasing weekly, twice weekly, being on it, making sure those 3 timelines go through as quickly as possible. That is your responsibility. It's not the mortgage broker's responsibility. They make about 500,000 quid a deal. Not their responsibility. Definitely not the solicitor's responsibility. They make like 500 quid, 1,000 quid if you're paying top dollar for good conveyances, about 1,000 quid about normal for good solicitors. That's not what you're making. You're making 30, 40, maybe even more £1,000 on each transaction. Act like it. Actually care about your vendor as if you're spending, they're paying you the 40, 50,000 pound. People say, well, the solicitors were rubbish. How good were you if you let them be rubbish? If they're that rubbish, go get another solicitor. You can change horses midway through a transaction. It's not difficult at all if you're on top of it. What normally happens is the investor sits back, the solicitor just plods along, and it all falls over because the vendor's in a hurry and no one cares enough about the vendor. Okay, number 6. Step number 6 is close quickly. I cannot say it more succinctly than that. You need to just get the deal over the line. You need to complete as quickly as possible. If the vendor's not ready to move out, that's fine. Ask him if he'd like the money and he can move out a week later. You can allow him to stay in the property. The solicitors can sort that out. He can stay in for a few days. He'll love you for it. If the vendor needs help with removals, offer to book the removals for him. Offer to pay for the removals. If the vendor's got a load of junk in the house and he can't get it out until the weekend, but you're ready to exchange and complete on Wednesday, tell him to leave it all in and you'll sort it out. What's it cost? 4 skips? 5 skips? Couple of guys for a day? It's 1,000 quid, 2,000 quid. You've just earned tens of thousands on the deal. Keep things in perspective, guys. Close early. One of the biggest tragedies that I see in SPI investing is where you're buying wholesale, but you worry about retail stuff. Like you worry about, oh, you've taken that lampshade down. Oh, I really like that lampshade. And oh, didn't know you were going to remove whatever it is from the property. Don't worry about it, guys. You're getting such a good discount. Get it over the line. Don't worry about the garden shed or the lawnmower or whatever it is. Close quickly because these people are motivated and our responsibility is to help them to sell, and then we get the properties on great terms or great prices. Finally, you own the property, you've got the keys, and you're on to step number 7, and so many people forget this. People think that you make money when you buy houses. Rubbish! You don't make money when you buy houses. You can lose money when you buy houses. You make money when you start monetizing it, when you start letting it out, when you start using it as a holiday let, service accommodation, single AST, however you're going to monetize it, it doesn't matter. That's when you start making your money. And you have to be in more of a hurry to monetize your property when you've got the keys in your hand than you were to get the keys. And you're in a real hurry to get the keys all the way through. When are we going to complete? What needs to happen next? When are we going to complete? What needs to happen next? Done it. What needs to happen next? Done it. When can we complete? Have we ordered funds? Have we got the mortgage offer in place? Those are all your questions leading up to it. Too many people go, yeah, got the keys. Woohoo! £40,000 discount. Yay! Where's my next deal? No, you haven't finished this deal. You've got to let your property out. And what you want to do is you want to maximize your monetization. And I've done loads of videos. I've done videos on finance. You can go look at those. I've done loads of videos on high monetization strategies. Let me just list some of them for you. Tenant buyers, so rent to buy. That's a massive strategy that you may or may not be familiar with. Emergency accommodation, enhanced housing benefit, massive strategy for you. Service accommodation, as well as many others, HMOs, etc. You need to be monetizing the property at a high level very, very quickly. Absolutely critical, guys, for you to do that. And that's it. That's your 7 steps. Let me quickly recap them for you. You need to be direct to vendor. Absolutely critical for you to have that communication with the vendor, because step 2, you need to work out their pain. What is it that's actually making them a motivated vendor. Number 3, you then need to design a win-win solution that works for them, works for you, as in design the transaction. Number 4, you need a power team to get the deal through. Number 5, you need to chain chase all the way through, weekly, twice a week, to get the deal over the line. You need to close quickly, which is number 6. And number 7 is, once you've got the keys and you own the property, you've got to monetize it quickly at the highest level possible. Guys, I hope you enjoyed my buy to let step-by-step complete guide for 2021. If you want to get more content, hit the notification bell, click the subscribe button. Go look at the other videos on the channel. We've got loads of videos about the specifics. This has had to be a whistle-stop tour. I think I've got it into my videographer's time frame. He gave me a specific time to share this with you. But if you want more in-depth analysis on some of those specific strategies, go look at our other videos. Get in touch with us if you want to explore getting more involved with EPP and us helping you further. Until then, happy investing.